Hello and welcome, Brett here with clickmill.co. Okay, so in this video, we're going to get into a couple other we're going to get into a couple other ways to define morality. In the last videos are what we're going to say are like the formal sort of philosophical approaches to this. Now, there are some other ways we can say kind of the same thing. There's a little bit of nuance. And so Zach is going to intro us with contractarianism and what that is. So in this video, we're talking about moral relativism as it relates to contractarianism.
So contractarianism, also known as social contract theory, it is associated with philosophers such as Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and it basically says that, I'm just going to read you the technical definitions so that we can look at it from the most abject standard here. It posits that moral standards emerge from a hypothetical agreement among rational individuals to create a just society. So breaking that down a little bit, basically what they're saying is that people will agree. So if the two of us agree to a rule,
or a society,
or society, yeah, if we're going to go for
me.
society-wide, it gets a lot more complex. But the basic idea between it is that if the two of us both agree that something is okay to do, that is what makes it okay to do.
That's
If
what
there's
makes the
three
morality
people,
of the contract. And no,
and
this is
then
an unwritten contract too. There's no actual contract. It's just you said metaphorical contract or a meta. What was the name?
it's a hypothetical agreement.
Hypothetical, right? So this is a hypothetical. Can I add something before you go into breaking down the logic in this here? Firstly, I'll say Rousseau, Locke. Who is the other gentleman that we are pulling this from?
Hobbes.
Hobbes, right? Okay. So these are Enlightenment philosophers, and I just want to point this out. There are essentially three, I believe, phases of philosophy when it comes to morality. So when you look at ancient Western philosophy, basically the approach for all the ancient philosophers is morality exists because God. And that is what the position that Christians are going to take, is God makes morality and he is the standard, and therefore do what God says. Then we get into the Enlightenment, where we're saying we don't need God. And morality is now because of reason. And so when you have these guys like Locke and Rousseau, what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, we don't need God to justify morality. What we really need is reason. Now, this is considered broadly a failure. And they have been trying to do this since about the 1650s, which is replace God with reason. This is considered a failure because the age of morality exists because reason has ended, and we have moved. That's the kind of Enlightenment period. We have moved now into a period in philosophy called oh my gosh, Zach, help me out here. It was
What we're currently in.
yeah, we're currently in, it was communism and socialism, and it moved into, it's the lack of knowledge. There is no knowledge. This is what it means. And it is I'm gonna have to refilm this.
Postmodernism.
There we go. Postmodernism. Okay, we'll leave it. We're being authentic. I don't remember everything the first time. Okay, so we've moved into a postmodernist era, which basically means there is no truth and there is no knowledge. So after the Enlightenment period, which is knowledge because of reason, well, it turns out you have to ground reason in a source of reason. And so everybody's just running around in circles trying to find the source of morality and reason, and then they can't figure out where reason comes from. So then what? Well, there is no truth. Just throw it all out the window, and everybody can just be a cat or whatever else they want to be. And now we have all this identity stuff coming in. Where does that come from? It comes from the belief that there is no truth. You get to just make up whatever you want. So this is where this morality stuff is coming in. It's the failure of the Enlightenment. So I just wanted to point out there's three phases of philosophy. First, it's because God said so. Then it's because reason said so, which failed. And now there is no truth. There is no morality. It's do whatever you want. And that is how philosophy has developed over time. And this is where this comes from. That's where those philosophers are in the Enlightenment. And they have invented the idea of contractarianism, as Zach has begun to break that down. So Zach, with that kind of history of contractarianism, why don't you go ahead and keep going on how do we debate this position?
Right. So social contract theory, there's multiple avenues to break this down. One of the first ones is, and a lot of the different, there are several different um, arguments put forth to define morality outside of objective morality rooted in God that do fall down to this being one of them. And it is called the tyranny of the masses. And so the tyranny of the masses is the basic idea behind it, that if within a society, within a group of people, the majority agree that one thing is okay, the minority, no matter what the size, this could be a 51-49 split, um, are now subject to this
The 51%.
rule,
Right.
to the 51%. And so it's called the tyranny of the masses because the 51% within any ideology, within any debate, is always going to win. And that can lead to some pretty dubious places, morally speaking.
So
So,
if I understand correctly, you're saying there's a divide within a culture, 51-49. People are really angry, 51% of them, and they're all justifying murder to overthrow government officials and do all this other stuff. And because that is the social contract that is hypothetically made because the majority of people agree with it, then that is what's moral, which seems pretty
and of
dubious
course,
because it's 51%.
yes, and of course, one of the things that they're going to say in response to that is, well, it's not an agreement that's being made between all active parties because there are people who object. And then the question is, how do we define a society? Because with it, this is meant to be a form of deriving moral standards that works within a society. If the society is constantly fracturing at every instance of disagreement, then you don't have a society.
Or you
So
have
in order for this,
multiple societies. In that case, you
well,
have
yes,
two societies with individual contracts.
well, yes, but then those because there will be no shortage of disagreements. Eventually, this leads to every single person being an island
Uh,
unto themselves.
so this breaks
Because
down ultimately into individual moral relativism. I have a contract with myself. I
yes,
love
yes,
that.
you have to,
Yeah,
because you'll never find someone who agrees with you 100% on everything.
right,
And so as the objections begin to take place, the contracts and the societies therefore break apart and
right.
fracture. So essentially, one of the presuppositions being put forth for this to work is that we have all agreed that we are in this group society, right, together,
Right.
and therefore the social contractarianism is the effective
Is the law,
law of, is the law,
which is
exactly.
tough because it's not even a written contract. Like
Well, it's not
you
even a
don't
written
even know
contract. It's
exactly what's in it. You just sort of feel it. Well, that's a problem right there.
right. Right.
It's funny.
So it cannot be uh it can refute itself in that, assuming that the two parties involved disagree at various elements, then they just split. It's no longer an agreement, it's no longer society. So there has to be room for there to be disagreement
Right.
that still
Which there can't be on
results
this
in,
theory.
which of course there will be, exactly. So
Gotcha.
there's that. Secondly,
So
there are a couple.
let's put that into practical application for anybody watching. So you're saying is the social contract defines the morality, but this is assuming that everybody perfectly adheres with the contract, which firstly isn't even written. And so if one group fractures into two groups that are, let's just say 50-50, firstly, there is no contract anymore because you have an equal number of people within the society who are saying there's a contract, but there's not one contract. So which contract now rules? Well, who knows? So that would be the approach I would take if I was talking about that and using the tyranny of the masses. So now what happens? Where's the contract? You have this break in your system. And what you're telling me is the contract is unilaterally agreed on by everybody. But what happens when everybody doesn't agree? That's not real life. Then what? Now they have to have an explanation for where morality comes from when the contract is not agreed upon by everyone. And that seems to be a problem. All right. So that's what I hear the first one. What else you got?
Yeah, so then they do have a couple of parameters built into the definition that are kind of attempts at solving that problem, but unfortunately, they also create further issues. They just complicate things
Yeah, of
more.
course they do. Yeah.
So the first thing that they put forth that is designed to help fix this, right, is they say that this is a hypothetical agreement between rational individuals.
So we got to
So
listen to the rational people now.
We can only listen. First of all, what is rational?
What does
So
that
who
mean?
determines what exactly? Who determines what rational means? Why is that person the one who determines what rational means?
Or that
And
group,
then
right? Who
in
decides if
that
it's
group,
rational? The
and then we
author,
have
it
a
sounds
circular
like.
definition. Yes. And
All
then we have a
right.
circular definition because if you're saying that the majority decides what's rational, well, then
And
who
then,
determines why those people get to decide? And it just
yeah,
cascades
what
backwards for
let
forever.
me speak to that a little bit, because so for anybody watching, a circular argument is an argument, for example, where you say contractarianism is what defines morality. Okay, so how do we know who defines this contract? Well, it's the rational people. So the rational people define the contract, and then the contract defines the morality. And you have like I didn't actually explain that correctly, Zach. Before the video, we talked how go back to the circle. How does that circle work?
The
Where
way that the circle
is no
works is
grounding?
this. So when we say in order for the agreement to be functional, it has to be between rational people.
There you go.
The first question that we're going to ask then is, well, what does rational mean and who decides what that is? And then it's like, well, the people who decide what rational is
Are the more
are the people who agree. So then you have a social contract within the social contract that determines what rational is, but we're still trying to justify social contractarianism. And so it's like, well, why do those people get to decide what rational means? Well, because they're the rational ones. Well,
right,
it's going to cascade backwards for forever because you have to have an anchor
ground,
point where we
right?
have outside of the two of us, Brett, if it's you and me making the deal, outside of the two of us, there has to be an objective standard of
Yes, but they
rationality
can't have
that
that.
we
Right. So
cannot
maybe
have that
maybe a
in
good
social
way to say
contractarianism.
this is a circular argument that he's pointing out in contractarianism is A is what defines morality. And it's like, okay, well, how do you how do you get A defining morality? Well, it's because B is behind A, right? So how do you get contractarianism to define morality? Well, it's because it's the masses. Okay, cool. Well, how does B determine the morality? Well, it's A that determines B. So B determines A and A determines B, and you've just got a circle going around and forever. Nothing actually starts anywhere. And that doesn't make sense. Something has to be the ground. And so the contract can't determine the morality if the morality determines the contract. That would be an idea of a circle. So this is very circular in reasoning. And then to your also point, Zach, you're saying that in this example from the article you're looking at is they're saying, well, you have to have rational actors. So the contract has to be rational. Why does the contract have to be rational? Because you're saying that the contract is a good source of morality because the people who have made the contract, which isn't even in writing, have made the imaginary contract irrational. Why is that preferable? Where are you
What
grounding
is
that? What is
rationality?
even rational? Yeah, why wouldn't we have irrational actors? People just going purely based off of their feelings. Well, because rationality is better. Why? Now you have to ground why rationality is better. Well, because there's truth. They can't say that because we don't believe in truth. That's why we need the contract. So the contract is grounded in truth. The problem is they don't believe in truth. So they have to explain away the grounding, and they can't have a ground. They have to have a circle. They have to have it come from thin air and try to make that
Yes.
believable. So that is the
Yes.
point, is to obscure where truth comes from. So
Right. And the purpose of the using the rational, and there's another one we'll get to in a second, but the purpose of using rational is to combat the tyranny of the masses, because
right,
the idea behind that being if
they're
it's
irrational.
genuinely a group of rational people,
Right,
there will not be anything that is tyrannical being
right,
imposed because we are rational people seeking out rational ends.
right. And this is
It's not it's not as ironclad as it looks
right.
on the surface level.
And right, of course. Well, and I think this is also very idyllic. This is very philosophy for the sake of philosophy. And if I'm talking to someone and I'm witnessing to them and they're bringing up, well, it's, and I have heard people talk about contractarianism, and it's like, okay, I'm going to talk to them based on reality. Is there actually a world where there's a bunch of perfectly reasonable people who all know this unwritten contract and we all agree on it? No. There's like 250 some countries, and all of them have different beliefs. And that's just the countries. The people in those countries have different beliefs. So are you really going to convince me that we have this perfect contract out there that we can actually depend on contractarianism? No. So how am I going to approach that? I'm going to approach it the exact same way we approach moral relativism, because this is moral relativism. As soon in the real world as there are more that, excuse me, as soon as there are more than one contracts in the real world, which there obviously are, you now have to tell me how you know which contract is right. And that is the dilemma they paint themselves back in there. Okay, cool. So the contract defines reality, or excuse me, morality. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Which contract? Wait, what? Right? Because they're in intellectual space and they're talking about some theoretical contract, but I'm in the real world. It's like, well, which contract? We've got social contracts in the US, probably multiple. You've got them in Canada and Mexico and Taiwan and Japan. And like, North Korea has a social contract, right? Everybody serves the supreme leader and they're indentured servitude and they don't get to eat. And that's moral, right? Which contract is right and why is that one right? And then even you can't answer that because now you are the determiner of morality and you are moving to individual moral relativism. You're the decider of the contract. What makes you able to decide?
Right.
Okay.
Well,
So
it's the natural offshoot of moral relativism. It's one of the areas that people are going to jump to very quickly without, they're not going to know,
they don't know
right? They're
this.
not going
Right.
to say that this is contractarianism, but what they're going to say when you start
Right.
asking them why one thing is better than another,
Right.
they're going to say, well, it's the thing that we all agree to,
Right.
right? So if we all say it's okay, then between us, it is okay.
Right.
And then
But as soon as
you,
you
you're,
implement, right, as soon as you have an outside source that disagrees, now you have to have a higher authority than just you or me. So even in the situation where we're talking about the contract, well, which contract? What do you believe in North Korea's contract or like the USSR's contract where they get the secret police and they disappear all the people?
what country
Hundreds of
has the
thousands.
highest population? There's
Yeah.
those are the ones
Is
that we should
that
be
right?
using.
Okay, so China's contract, we agree with, also disappearing people that dissent and, top-down tyranny. Is that what we believe? Well, no. Okay, says who? Says you. Okay, what if I told you that I think the most valid contract, because now we're just pitting contracts against each other. You have to have an ultimate the contract's not necessarily wrong, but who's the contract with? It's with God. That's where the actual contract is. And so what God says goes. Well, I think that North Korea's contract's the best contract. That's my moral individual truth. And what do they say? Well, it's the biggest country. Says who? Says you. The only place that you stop it with a real grounding is at the level of an ultimate entity that decides morality, that is the morality, and that's God. So you'll notice there we're talking about contractarianism, but there's two contracts. Well, now we have to decide which contract. Now we've moved to individual. And so you'll notice they shift in this debate, this fake debate, from contractarianism to individual moral relativism. They said the contract decided it, but as soon as you have two, they say that I decide it.
Well, it
Well,
started individual, it went
and
to
it shifts.
contract, and now
Right.
it's come right back
Right.
to
And now it's
individual.
come back. Right. And so they're moving around. And then you can pin them on that too. You can say, you said it was individual and then you changed and you said it's based on the social contract. But as soon as I asked you which social contract, you went back to saying you decide. So which is it
Mhm.
here? Like, do you make up morality or does it like what are you talking about? You seem like you're really moving around. Like my position hasn't changed at all. I think there's a God that defines morality and that's that. And you keep needing to move around because your logic's not working. So that's
Mhm.
obviously very confrontational, but that's the basic idea here. So in this video, we talked about social contractarianism, which is more of a philosophical way to basically say cultural relativism. And so anyway, in the
There's
next,
actually another
yeah,
there's a couple more circles in there.
okay,
Um, and I think it's useful. I actually missed this one until just now. It says the moral standards emerge from an agreement. Why do we have to agree?
yeah,
Why does it need to be an agreement? Why does that just by asserting that the agreement is in of itself the thing from which morals can be derived
yeah,
is to say that the agreement is a moral option versus disagreement.
right. So there's
And
no
now,
logical reason, Zach. You and I couldn't come to an agreement right now that robbing all of our neighbors is morally acceptable and that's actually how we build wealth in our society and now it's totally morally fine and then we're going to go what's going to happen in real life. You and I have this one-on-one society here where we agree on this, and what are we going to do? We're going to get arrested for robbing and pillaging our neighbors' houses, and we're going to go to jail and we're going to go to the judge and we're going to say, well, we had a social contract, and the judge is going to laugh at us and be like, you guys are really dumb.
mhm,
What are you even talking about? That doesn't hold in
yep.
reality.
Yep. And people don't live like it either. No one
Right.
does. People who would put this forth as it only works insofar as there's no confrontation. That's kind of the thing here.
Right.
I can talk all I want to about how aliens don't exist, they do not exist. And then as soon as one, beams me up into the sky and starts talking to me, I'm now confronted with the reality that hard lines up against my belief system. With
Yes.
you can say, oh, it's whatever we all agree upon. Well, that's really easy to say when you're in a society that functions upon a series of agreements. But
Yeah.
what about when you're suddenly forced into a scenario where there's confrontation and there's disagreement?
Yeah. Well, and what if you're just in a world where there's more than one society? I mean, right there, yeah, maybe within one society, you have perfect agreement. You can go with that all day long. But as soon as you step outside the society, there are other societies who hate you and want to kill you and disagree with your morality. Now you have
Mhm.
to justify why your contract is right because there's more than one contract. The point is the grounding is the ultimate standard. As soon as you have two of them, how do you know what's the ultimate standard? So that's great. Okay, did you have another one?
Yeah, there's one more, and then I actually think we could go back to something, but the other one is okay, reading the definition again, just picking out the parts that are circular.
Yep.
Moral standards emerge from a hypothetical agreement. Okay, why? Why is agreeing better than disagreeing? Why
Right.
does there
Okay.
have to be an agreement? That is a moral claim.
Right.
Moral standards emerge from a hypothetical agreement among rational individuals. Why rational?
Why do
What
you have
is
to be rational?
rationality? Who decides it? Why is
Right.
that better than
You have to
irrationality?
ground your rationality now, right? Okay.
That's also a moral claim.
Right.
And then additionally, moral standards emerge from a hypothetical agreement among rational individuals to create a just society. So on the very
That's the
back
best
end
one.
there, well, that's the funniest one because just is
Just.
just synonymous with moral.
That's really funny because that was the circular argument that we were talking about. You have to have rational, just actors to make a contract that defines morality. Well, doesn't morality tell us what's just? You have to have just people to create a just contract. Where did the justice come from? Now the people have the justice. Well, the contract tells the people what's just, and then the just people tell us what's just, so the contract knows what you got. A, therefore B, and B, therefore A. That breaks, what is it, Aristotle's basic rules of formal logic. You can't have A equal B and then B equal A if they're both dependent on each other circularly there. So that is truly hilarious. Where do you get your justice? I thought that came from the contract. Well, it doesn't. It comes from the people making the contract.
Right.
Great. Love that.
Right. Well, yeah, it's so there's three sticking points right in there where it's going to be circling back in on itself to assert that an agreement is the thing from which morality is derived from, is to assert that agreeing is
Agreements.
moral and
Yep.
disagreement is amoral.
So you have to have agreement as a presupposition. You have to have the other thing, which is rationality as a
Rationality.
presupposition, meaning to presuppose those things as good, which we haven't grounded as why. And then you also have to have just, they have to be just agreements. Well, the agreement was supposed to define the justice. So now we have
Mhm.
justice pre-agreement. So where did that come from?
Mhm.
So you have to have these three things existing to even have this contract. Where do
Yes.
all of those things come from? Where do you ground rationality? How about in a divine rational creator? You can't ground it anywhere else because what do? Now we are in, instead of a moral relativism, we're talking about relative truth. And that is called, oh my gosh, there's a name for that. Intellectual relativism, there's a name for it. In philosophy, I'm missing it here. In philosophy, the study of knowledge has a name. I'll see if I can't put it in the comments, but there's a name for knowledge relativism. And so now, where do we get the rationality? Well, you have to now tell me where rationality comes from. Well, it comes from the individual, it comes from the culture, it comes from the history, it comes from, we have a contract, a rational contractarianism. So the rational contract determines the rationality that we use in the moral contract. And we have two contracts to define morality because you see how this is ridiculous. So yeah, you have to presuppose rationality, but we don't know where that comes. We have to presuppose justice. Well, what defines what's just? I thought this contract did it, but no, this one defines morality. So we have to have another contract that defines what's just, or individual moral relativism. You have to go through all of the justifications for justice, and you also have to do that with an agreement. Why is agreeing better than not agreeing? So I love the breakdown of that, Zach. That's really entertaining. And so that you guys know, we talked about this for maybe 2 minutes before getting into this video. So the more I think about it, the more entertaining that is, because it's really flimsy. Anything else you want to throw in?
I don't have anything else I want to throw in. I think that if you can watch this video and follow along with the breakdowns for how these things circle back on themselves and then fall apart, you can do that with pretty much all of them, because like I kind of said in the beginning, there's several that do fall back on social contractarianism.
Right.
And then you just got what we just said, but then they all have assertions within them that are contingent upon morality being defined, and these are all attempts to define morality. So as long as you can as long as you can follow along and see how we picked those three things apart from social contractarianism, you can do it with all of them, because they all have those same issues.
Right. Yeah. And I would say this too, from a super basic perspective, just take one and put it up against the other. That's the easiest way to do it. Like, oh, you're telling me that cultures determine morality? Well, there's more than one culture. So which culture is right? Now what defines morality? Well, it's the culture I choose. Now they've switched position. Or you can put it up against the absurd, and you can say, so what you're telling me is cultures determine reality. So Hitler's culture in the 1940s, and now they have to choose. That's the easiest approach, and it works with all of them. Same thing with contractarianism. So you're telling me that the social contract and the cannibal island of whatever country is totally valid contract because they all believe eating people that land on the shore is morally acceptable. That's just the same thing as cultural relativism. So anyway, that's the easiest way. And then, of course, you can always get further into it and look at these sort of circular reasonings, which we've talked about briefly, or grounding other presuppositions. Well, where do you get rationality? Where do you get justice, if that's required for the contract? You can get into those things as well. I do think easiest thing is just going to the absurd and showing why it's ridiculous. So anyway, in this video, we're going to close here on contractarianism. And in the next video, we're going to talk about putting morality. This is going to be more atheistic in nature, morality and moral naturalism. We'll see you there.